And a very good morning to you if you've just joined us. We're just getting our act together here.
Letting the last few people through the door. And you've still got a couple of minutes if you want to quickly grab yourself a drink. Just to say a few words, if you haven't been to one of these things before, I'm Paul. Nicola is straight above me, above the sound studio here. And Nicola's doing all the complicated stuff, the technicalities. So if anything's going wrong for you, if the sound isn't great or something happens, then let Nicola know. You can do it through the Q&A pane on the screen, or you can just drop her a little email. She's constantly monitoring her email, and she'll do anything she can. If it all goes horribly wrong for you, you don't have to worry because we're recording the whole thing. And actually, as a new feature, we're going to be putting out in little snippets all the questions. So again, if you can't stay for the Q&A or the extended Q&A after 10:15, we'll be putting out all the questions as little video snippets on LinkedIn and what else? Twitter as well. We've started doing it. So Kasha Murphy, who's now joined the team, she's doing all our digital stuff and it's fantastic. She's brilliant at it. So thanks very much indeed, Kasha. I don't think you're here this morning. I think you're too busy looking after our digital strategy. Anyway, so how does this work? Well, I've got about 35 minutes of material for you. And then after that, at around about 10:05, 10:10, we'll take a few questions. If we run out of time, and I am really keen to always finish these things bang on 10:15 so that people can observe their diaries, as it were. If we run out of time, then I'll just carry on fielding questions until we've run out of questions. So I guarantee anything you ask me will actually get responded to today. A couple of runners and riders, people who have been with us or before or who are new to the game. The oldies, Alan L, welcome back. Hi. Anne D, Carol D, Kath S and Paul C. And also Stuart T and Cherry G. Lovely to see you all back. Thanks for trusting us with your precious hours on Friday morning. And newbies, JR, hello, Debbie M and Tim W. Of course, there are loads of other people in the room, but those are just a few we've picked up who are new or returners. So, yeah, welcome back or welcome for the first time. Well, maybe I'm going to explain. We've got a really packed, I probably have far too much material for you, and I am going to canter through at a fairly swift pace. As I said, don't worry if you miss something. There is going to be a video, and so you'll be able to look back and review for the things that you're particularly interested in. Just so you can locate us, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to say what we actually do, because I don't do these for a living. We don't make films for a living. Our cartoons, our sticky videos, they are just a bit of fun, and also to get our ideas out here. These webinars are an opportunity to build some trust. If you're new to us, you're obviously come here to get some thoughts, hopefully a bit of insight, some knowledge, but also it's an opportunity for me to build trust, for you to get to know us. And when you come across a piece of work, a project, something that you are trying to resolve in your business, then perhaps you might think of us. But the main idea is that you can just observe and take things away. Unlike with most tasters, we don't just give you teasers, we actually give you some answers, particularly some things to experiment with and to take away back into real life. So even if you do nothing else but come on these webinars, I guarantee that you will always get something to take away. It would be great if you got in touch afterwards, if you had a particular question or a particular thing that you're tangling with that you want to discuss. It'd be great to hear from you and have a conversation with you. But don't feel obliged that it has to go any further than that. Okay. So what are we going to do today? For those of you who've just joined us, welcome. You haven't missed anything. I've just been giving a bit of a preamble. There are actually still people coming through the door, so I'm a bit reluctant to start, but it's bang on 10:30, and I think I should get going. Where are we? Yeah, everybody's dashing in. There are always some people who are late, aren't there? So I'm going to switch off my my camera in a minute or so. But what I'm going to very quickly cover today, or I'm going to try not to do it too quickly, but here's the quick synopsis. What the objective of every conversation should be. The top 5 reasons that conversations break down. How to repair a conversation that's started to go badly, and how to retrieve one that's really, how to repair one that's already broken. And then some key do's and don'ts and some final thoughts. My aim with all these webinars, and indeed in the projects that we do, is to promote simplicity and to provoke thought, and above all, though, to get people experimenting. The whole point of gathering any kind of knowledge is that, well, it stays just knowledge, just facts, until you start to do something with it. And I'm very keen that you do something with this. At the end, around about 1:15, when the main webinar is over, I'm going to stay on for what we call now a free-for-all, where you can ask questions about absolutely any topic. Leadership, team tensions, conflict, ethics, aggression, communication, bad news, giving bad news, attitude problems, personality clashes, anything like that. Okay, let's get going. So I'm going to switch off my camera now, and I will see you back in a bit. So, what is the whole point? What should I be doing? What should my key objective in a conversation always be? Well, I think there are 3 things, but one takes supremacy, and I'll come to that in a second. The first one is that I have to really look after the quality of the conversation, not the quality, or rather the quality above my own objective. Obviously, we all want to get something done, but that often gets in the way of looking after how the process of the conversation is going. So one thing, though, that does have to take some sort of place here is honesty. And I'm going to say some more about that in the coming minutes. Honesty primarily about what I'm trying to do, and honesty about my feelings. Also, one thing that often goes away when things get fraught is the listening. So this business about honesty and listening, they are both carefully or inextricably linked to the quality of the conversation. But there's something else which is rather invisible, which tends to be ignored, and that is the actual process. I'm going to say a bit more about this right now because it's really important. So what tends to happen is when we go into a conversation, we look after the really obvious things, the facts, the things that are on the agenda. But often what gets lost in us pursuing the agenda is that we forget to look out for the things that are happening with the human beings. And actually what takes over is their feelings, our feelings, energy levels, tempers. We're human beings, but we tend to ignore that when we get into conversations. We ignore it in favour of what we think is the objective reality. And that way, we actually lose control, we lose touch of what's really going on. We leave it entirely to chance. So here are the 5 things that happen when we do leave these things to chance. The top 5 reasons that conversations break down. Okay, so firstly, number 1 is that we give up responsibility, or in fact, we don't even take responsibility for what is going on in the room. We leave the conversation to go on autopilot. We're all adults, we're all clever, so we think, well, we'll just crack on with the topic and people will be able to look out for themselves. But what happens then is it turns into a free-for-all. It turns into the survival of the loudest, the scariest, the most powerful, the most persistent. In a way, you could say that the traffic wins, the other cars win. But it's not a good win. So that's the first thing that goes wrong. The second possibility is that we persist with logic. We stick to the point that we came in with. You could say that we're in denial of. Okay, who did these slides? I think I know who interfered with that one. Okay, we're in denial of what's actually going on. We ignore the fact that people are losing their tempers or getting tired or are fed up with us or that we're talking too much. The odd thing is, think about how many arguments you've been in your life. 100? 1,000? 100,000? And yet we still make the same mistakes. We still pretend, and chiefly the mistake is we pretend that there are no big feelings going on in the room. So, how do we remind ourselves of that? Well, here's a very, very quick drawing that I often show people, and I'm just going to quickly do something on that now. So, the thing to bear in mind is that in a situation, in any conversation, there's the logic bit going on. And then underneath here, there are the feelings. Now, when something happens up here, what we tend to do is we tend to battle away trying to sort out the feelings. Or we're trying to sort out the things by battling away on the logic. But that doesn't work because we're just arguing. So what we actually need to do is to come down here to where it's all really going wrong and pay attention to the feelings. So a conversation, a tricky conversation, has a whole load of diversions away from the topic. And I'm going to come back to what that actually looks like. The point to remember, the really important bit to remember, is that there is this thing going on down here. You can't get away from the feelings by just persisting with the logic. You won't sort them out. You will just end up stuck in the snow, going nowhere. Okay, so that's that bit there. So, what's the third thing that can go wrong? Well, the third thing is aggression. And this you will not be strangers to. I know I'm not. I'm often the one who is being aggressive. Now, how can I own up to that so cheerfully? Well, I put it this way. I smile frequently when people mention that they're being very assertive or that they were very assertive in a particular conversation. And that's a joke. I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? Because actually you are, in reality, you are either being assertive or you are being aggressive. And here's what I mean. The fact assertiveness, or rather aggression, is a 1-point scale. It does not join on if I go too far, with my words. Assertiveness does not, I'm sorry, I've got this the other way around. Assertiveness does not join on to aggression. It doesn't just end up there. There's a very clean split. And we all know when we've gone too far. What is this definition? What is this jump here? It's when I care about my feelings more than I care about yours. That's it, pure and simple. When I give supremacy to my feelings, that's it. I can do it quietly. I can do it in a gentle whisper. I can do it with a smile on my face. but it is not being too assertive. It is being aggressive. So aggression gets a bad press, and of course we all madly deny that we're being aggressive. Of course, very often we are being aggressive, even by just persisting and persisting and persisting. That is a form of aggression. Hopefully we've cleared that one up. Okay, now, lack of listening. This is probably the biggest one of all. So I'm just going to get rid of that. Right, there we go. So you probably see, if you look on a motorway or you look at a junction, either side of you, there will be somebody wearing music. I can't understand how this happens, but we actually regularly do this in conversations. When somebody stops, I'm going to take ownership of this. When I stop listening, essentially I have gone deaf progressively to everything. I hear some of the words, but actually I'm starting to filter out most of the words, most of the feelings, most of what everybody else is talking about. And I end up on my own in the conversation. Nothing else counts. The more I go on, the worse it gets. And what actually wins is otherness, this thing down here. The other people involved in the conversation become the enemy, the opposition. Out goes logic, out go the feelings of others, out go the other ideas, out goes the other view. And I'm barreling down the motorway in my own pod, in my own bubble, thinking that I'm right. The fifth thing that goes wrong is that we just wear each other down. I am not going to make the obvious joke of getting tired. But what we do is, and particularly people who are not very good at observing themselves, keep on going too far. And we think that by working harder and harder at it, or keeping the meeting going, that's a way of getting the job done, and it's not. It actually makes it worse. So meetings go on too long and in an undisciplined fashion. We don't facilitate enough. We don't bring people into the conversation. We don't look out for the quiet person. We don't look out for anything but finishing at almost at any cost, at the cost of the tyres. And lastly, the final reason, and the final main reason, of course there are others, why conversations go wrong. And this is, I promised you 5, I couldn't help it, 6. People just don't know what to do. It's the blind leading the blind. Some people just haven't figured out, haven't had the opportunity to think about how conversations get put together. Okay, so hurtling forwards. How do you retrieve a conversation that's already going badly? Well, the first thing you can do is to pay attention and listen to where the noise is coming from. Look out for the noise. And when you find it, empathize with it. How does that sound? For those of you who have not really meddled with empathy a lot, or know it as a concept but not a reality, you may hear things like this coming out of an empathizer's mouth. They will turn to the person and say, "You sound annoyed. You sound fed up. You sound frustrated." And then they may say, "You sound frustrated about the agenda," or "You sound frustrated about the budget that I'm trying to put through," or "You sound frustrated about what I just said. You look worried." So we point out the noise that we're hearing from, and we respectfully point out to the person that we've heard them. There is no point just letting the noise go on behind you. The second thing we can do to retrieve a conversation that started to go badly is to look out for people's states, particularly when they're not saying something. So this is the quiet faction. And usually they're in the majority. Just because people are quiet, it does not mean you're getting away with it. You're not pushing through what you want to push through. Be especially aware of this if you are the boss in that context. It is very easy to use our bossiness unintentionally to push something through. The person who's in charge, who manages to look out for where people are when they are quiet, is always going to be able to get more things through and more things done through other people than the one who just marches past the signals, the subtle signals that people are giving off. And finally, this one. You've seen the situation yourselves. Everybody goes hurtling off in a direction, either because they're time pushed or mostly because people are frightened. They're frightened of something not going right, or they're excited, or there's a lot of money involved, or the process has already begun and nobody wants to call it. So this one is about pausing the action in the conversation to point out what's going on. And it can just sound something like this. Can I just stop everybody? Sorry. Can I just press the pause button? I've just noticed that ... And it's a way of giving people some news about what's happening. Now, they can choose to carry on, but they do it knowingly. So a few tips here. There's 3 tips, and this one is probably the hardest of all, but the most effective technique for retrieving a conversation that's already started to go pear-shaped. Firstly, here, be prepared to do it more than once. X might be 3 times, 4 times. But certainly it'll take you a couple of times because people will say, oh yeah, that's very interesting. And then they will just start doing it all over again. 2, it's important that you do not take sides. If you've taken the role of facilitator, you have to put your own opinion on hold. Thirdly, when you're actually pausing the conversation like this, it's really important that you then pause yourself. Don't then give a suggestion about what happens next. Why? Because it'll look like you are only trying to take control of the meeting for your own ends. So as soon as you decide to take control like this and help everybody out, you become the facilitator. You lose your opinion sharing power for a bit. You've kind of sacrificed your opinion for the good of the process, the good of the quality of the conversation. It could be a conversation, it could be a meeting. Often these things go wrong in meetings, but also one-to-one. So those are 3 ways that you can retrieve the conversation that has started to go wrong. But what do you do if the thing's really already broken? Okay, so you need to take some more serious action, and we've already touched on it, but it's doing it a lot more. So firstly, well, it's conversational first aid. But the thing is, what do you fix? You have to have an order of priority. What and who do you fix first? So I've got this little table here that I use, and it's a really good decision-making sort of black box to figure out what's the priority. Because let's face it, in a conversation, this is all happening really quickly. So here's how you decide what to do first and to whom. Here are a number of situations. Situation number 1. And these are relative expressions of emotion. So let's say scenario 1 is you are feeling a little bit better, relatively speaking, than they are. What is the possibility here? Well, if you want to do good first aid on the conversation, yes, you pause it, and then you empathize with the person that you're facing or the people you're facing. You don't look too happy, John. Jane, you seem worried. You sound really fed up, Peter. So it's very simple. It's just putting out that piece of empathy, that thought that you've seen, that you've had, that reaction, what you've noticed about them. Option 2. This is scenario 2, rather, when you're feeling slightly worse than they seem to be. At this point, it would be hard for you to empathise, and it is probably time to speak up and say something. So you can be assertive. And scenario number 3, if you're both looking unhappy, you think, well, I'm unhappy, she's unhappy, what happens now? Then it's really digging deep and saying, okay, can I bring myself to empathise with her? Yeah, okay, I will. But if you really, really don't feel that sense of generosity, then the best thing you can do is to firstly, to be assertive and then to empathise. Just so you can see it written down, here's what it looks like. So in the case of empathy, you're pointing out how they seem to be feeling, what about and why. In the case of assertiveness, it's you, how you're feeling, what about and why. So the structure is just the same. And frankly, if you just manage to spit out the words that they seem to be feeling or that you're feeling, that is already amazing. Remember to keep it really brief, mention the feeling, and pause. Okay, some do's and don'ts. So, firstly, the do's. It is increasingly, is it? Oh, I don't know. I'm questioning myself now. I was going to say it's increasingly difficult to be honest in conversations because there always seemed to be so much at stake, but there always was a lot at stake. And nothing's really changed. And maybe what's really at stake most of the time is our pride and our good feelings, our fear. We get frightened very easily. But one thing that you can do, which really, really does help hugely, is to be prepared to be honest about your own feelings. If you're feeling that scratch, that ow, there is a tendency, there is a temptation to sort of polish it away, to cover it up. But it's not worth it, because what it'll do is it'll stop you contributing properly, and it will stop you being generous towards other people, looking out for their feelings, looking out for where they are. Being honest about your feelings also has the added benefit of helping other people to follow you there. The second thing is, and this is probably the hardest thing I'm going to suggest that you experiment with today, is that when somebody is starting to get angry, it might just be that they're raising their voice. They're just getting uncomfortable to be with in the room. Try to remember what it was like being a child. When children get desperate, because they haven't learned to have influence, and, we call it the terrible twos, don't we? And it's dreadful when you think about it, but it's when a child has begun to figure out what it wants, but hasn't learned to figure out how to ask for it. And so what we tend to do, I should really have put crosses on this on these sort of admonishing parents, because actually, what we're really supposed to be doing is to treat somebody who is angry or in shouting, to remember that they're actually in pain and fear. And that's the really weird one. This is not a spiritual thing at all. I'm not trying to get you by stealth to be quote unquote nicer people. When we are in pain, as children and as adults, we shout. We get angry because we're frightened, we're worried about being left out, we're afraid that we're going to be ignored and diminished. And so we up the ante. So when somebody does, try not to be the admonishing parent in the room. And finally, and this is really powerful, be prepared to call out your own negative contribution first. Be prepared to be the one who says, yeah, that was my screw up. I'm sorry. I apologize. Okay. So, so much for the do's. Let me now get on to some don'ts. This first one is really difficult when we are sure of ourselves, when we are sure that our opinion is right, and we are sure that they are wrong, and that what they are about to do is not only wrong, but it's damaging. It's going to mess things up. You will be aware that there is one of those in the air at the moment. People have, for quite a long time now, been behaving appallingly towards each other because they think they're right. And to do this really does dreadfully, it just doesn't mess up the conversation that we're having with the person, but it really gives people a very bad impression about what it's even like to be in a conversation with us. So steamrolling people mentally or emotionally or, in terms of their views, what they do is they just quietly walk away, or sometimes noisily if we're lucky, because at least then we know. But mostly they'll just quietly withdraw and we won't know what went wrong, what we did wrong. So beware of this one, especially if you know, quote unquote, know you're right. Okay, here's the second one. This one, again, is about being right. If you think what happens when we're right, we keep on pushing like a shunting train, like a goods train in a shunting. We are pushing things into the direction that we want because we can, because we're powerful. But these carriages then become passive. They might still be there physically, but they're not there mentally and they're not there emotionally. And they're not going to do what they've been pushed into doing. This is especially the case if your team is working remotely and you are trying to get their buy-in to do something. If you don't pick up on the objections because they're inconvenient or because you think you're right, then you are going to lose your team big time. And thirdly, no one is ever completely to blame. It is totally a joint effort. So when something goes wrong in a conversation, even in your mind, if you start to think that it was their fault, you're already creating something, an imbalance between you, some bad feeling that need not be there. It takes two to have an argument. It takes two to fall out. And as you already know now, there is a lot you can do to retrieve a conversation that has just started to go wrong. So try not to point the finger and try to encourage others, if you're in a room, from doing the same as well. Try to get out of that he did it, he said, she said. Let me just get rid of my email here, which I should have done before. There we go. There we go. Yeah. Okay. So we've come for the up to the Q&A piece now, where you get your chance to say what's on your mind, what you're thinking. Questions. What have you noticed? What's been happening to you? I'm just going to look in the Q&A pane now and see what's coming through. And while those come through, okay, we've got one here. So is there anything I can do? So I'm going to switch on my camera here so I'm actually talking to you properly. So is there anything that I can do beforehand if I already know that the conversation is going to be difficult? Well, yes, there is actually. And there's one particular thing that we use a lot in facilitation, and you will also use yourself. There are a lot of learning and development mods on the call this morning, so this will be familiar territory to you. But for the non-LNOD people, or people who haven't gone into the whole facilitation education thing, what you can do is you can do something called contracting. So you actually tell people up front at the beginning of the meeting, look, this is an important, we've got some important decisions to make, and I would like to sort of nominate myself, or maybe all of us, to keep an eye on the conversation, because we need to really make progress, and we also need to look after each other. Or whatever words you can bring together, which basically says to everybody, look, we need to look out. A bit like you would at the bottom of a mountain that is a bit tricky. You say, okay, everybody, we're all in this together. Let's just, not rush ahead. Let's do what we can to look after the conversation. So that when you come to the bit where you have to say, oh, I've got to say something, I've got to press the pause button, you can. So that's one thing that you can do. I'm just going to take the questions pane out there. Okay, somebody's asked, can you recap the second retrieval option? 1 was empathy, 2 was pause, action and feedback, but I didn't note down 2. Okay, I am going to go back in the screens. I did go very quickly, so bear with as I go back to retrieve. Here we go. Hang on, bear with. Oh, here we go. All right, yep, here we are. So the first one was to listen for the noise. The second one was to look out for the signs that something's going on in the room. And so this is not looking out for the noise or listening out for the noise, but listening out or watching for who's not saying something, where people are, who's scribbling, who seems distracted, who doesn't seem happy. And it's a brave thing to do, because it would be so much easier than to just carry on moving forwards. But that was number 2. Look out for what's going wrong quietly. The non-noisy ones. And then, just for the sake of recap, the third one was this business about pausing everybody and speaking out. Okay. After a period where I was raged at for at least 2 to 3 hours a day by a CEO, I now find it very hard to engage with people when they get angry. Any tips on reducing my sensitivity to this? Well, that sounds really horrible, and that it became a habit is awful, and it's a testament to your strength in the first place that you managed to put up with it for so long. So I take my hat off to you. What to do about your sensitivity to it? Well, I guess there is no quick one there, and maybe it's maybe it's that people getting angry at you is a real sore point, and being prepared to speak up really early if it's happening again. It strikes me, though, and this sounds like this is probably the toughest option of all, to try and look beyond that anger at the person behind it, who was probably, and I don't know if it was I don't know if you said it was a man or a woman, Tim. I'm just looking. Oh, you were, yeah. You're being very PC. You're using the they. A man shouting and screaming and being aggressive is horrible, but even us fellas have a real hard time with anger. We have hard time with our small emotions, and it often does come out as anger. Actually having the presence of mind, and this is tough, to empathise with the person as if they were crying in the extreme, could have an amazing effect. So I'm not saying you sound tearful, but you sound really angry. And actually going back at them, did you see what happened to my face there? I got really emphatic. Go back at them with the level of energy, any energy that you can summon, which matches them. Another thought just popped into my head is that when people get angry, somebody cowering in front of them, and this is biology, this is not about right or wrong, this is just the way it is. When someone is cowering in front of us, it often has an effect of making it worse, because we want them to push back. In fact, we're frightened because we've thrown our toys out of the pram and there's nowhere else to go. So that's the tough one. Try and see if you can face it head on, and if need be, call it out. But try empathy first. Thanks, Tim. Okay, so Pete, thanks for that. Anna says, great point about sensitivity to anger. I'm the same. I go almost fetal and very quiet. Okay. So for you, Anna, as well, have a go at imagining the person who's in pain behind that anger. The anger is a show, it's noisy, it's unpleasant, and it's also about how we have been trained way back to address anger. My mother, I'll volunteer this, my mother was perennially angry. She was always angry. So what I learned to deal with anger really early on, my sister gabbles when she's got someone angry in front of her. It totally ignores their feelings. My brother becomes belligerent. I think I tend to go belligerent if I'm not concentrating. If someone gets angry back with me, so my family have learnt to face up to me, and whoa, instantly it diffuses me because I realise very quickly. So they've trained me back. So there's a clue as well, to go back with empathy or assertiveness, but to go back with something. The cowering feels horrible, and it is totally natural, but it won't make it better. Chris, a conversation first aid. You recommended a solution in the third scenario was to empathise if you can, but if not, to assert your point of view and then empathise. What happens if your assertiveness makes things worse? Oh, that's interesting. So, Chris, what you're saying is, what happens if by me saying, well, actually, I'm really not enjoying. I'm not enjoying this conversation. The other person says, well, I'm not either. What do we do then? Well, here's the thing. As soon as I've said my feeling, and you have to say the feeling, Chris, what you'll find is instantaneously, and I will put several pints of beer on this, that you will become freer to be able to empathise. So if they come back at you, apparently more agitated than they were before, I think you may find that you can empathise. Worst case scenario, Even if that doesn't work, and even if you can't bring yourself to empathize, then actually you've already moved the conversation on, because you've both been honest about your feeling. But it's one of those for testing out. Us being assertive it tends not to misfire. It just brings more of the truth. So look out for the truth and don't get too worried if it's anger. You're at least dealing with the truth then, not pretend. Tim was just coming back saying it was a man, understood his frustration, but he couldn't understand the situation. Yeah. Tough. Very, very difficult with that one. Pausing and explaining back, or actually there's another one, Tim, you've given me another thought, which is to go and have a conversation, to book a meeting with the person and have a conversation about the conversation, or what it's like in general to be with them when there is nothing on the table, when there's no topic at stake. Anna says she likes the idea of treating the anger as tears. I just think I think it is. Well, I biologically that's how we are. That's how we're wired. Anger is a very complex thing, and it's not what it sounds like. And yeah, you said I try not to make it worse by being quiet. Great. Yeah, doing something energetic. Do anything energetic. Empathize or be assertive. Great. Last one, just before I recap and finish the webinar and then come back to Q&A. How do I talk to someone I'm diametrically opposed to, e.g. someone for Brexit? Oh, Pete, how could you? Well, I think that the clue is in the question, Pete. How do I talk to someone? Actually, you don't talk to them. You listen to them until they're finished. And then if they're going on, and empathy tends to reduce the length of the diatribe, then you can go back to them and say, look, I'm now, and then this is the pause bit, this is the commentary bit. I'm now finding it difficult to listen to you because I just listen to you a lot, and I'd really like it now if you were to listen to me. Or let's just stop this conversation because it's very difficult not to get agitated about it. So again, that goes back to doing the running commentary, the pause, the cars hurtling everywhere. Just pause and say, this is what I see happening in this conversation. I think we're both getting really annoyed with each other, and it'd be a shame to spoil this conversation with something as stupid as Brexit. There we go. And that is it for time-wise. I'm going to come back to the screens now just for the last little bit so that you can leave on time if you need to. So final thoughts. Firstly, I would say to you, put your hand up first. It's an important gesture that gives other people permission to be faulty. Secondly, it always takes two people to have a problem in a conversation. Don't go looking for blame. Just try and focus on the fact that you did a joint effort to get into the problem, and you could do a joint effort to get out of it again. And it is possible to retrieve a conversation that's gone sour. And thirdly, keep an eye on the things that really matter. People's feelings, exhaustion. Friday, we know what that's like. We're all exhausted. We all do too much. Email, electronic media of all other types. So remember to treat people as human beings and yourself. Notice your own fatigue levels, your own limitations, and take them seriously because they have an important impact on the logical outcome of any conversation that you have. So that's how to have a real conversation. I want to say thank you so much to everybody for joining this morning, for entrusting us with your precious time on a Friday morning when you're trying to wrap up the week. There is a prize for the first, let's say, 5 people to come back with an experience of having done something with this today. The prize is the URL to the brand new animated sticky video we've made, which has literally just been finished this week. By Dennis, our amazing animator, who is working for us out in eastern Siberia. I didn't send him there. He wanted to go. That's where he's from. So, Dennis, thank you so much for your videos. And first 5 people who come back saying, I've done this, and point to a particular bit of the webinar, you get to the sneak preview, the private preview of that video sent to you. I also want to also mention that Kasha Kasha Murphy would very much like to speak to a few of you. If you preferred that she didn't call you up, just put it in the Q&A pane, and I'll make sure that you're not on her list. But we like to stay in touch with what people think of these webinars, what they found useful, and what they'd like us to talk about next time as well. And thank you to Nicola upstairs, who's done all the hard work, who does all the databases and looks after everybody. Make sure you can actually dial in on these things. It takes hours and hours. You would not believe what it takes. So, Nicola, thank you very much indeed. Thanks to you again. Have terrific weekends, and we will see you very soon. I'm going to stay on now for the free-for-all and for any remaining questions. But to those of you who have to go, bye for now. Have a fantastic weekend. So if you are able to stay on now, I am going to just clear the screen, and again, I'm looking back to the Q&A pane for extra questions. Okay, so there's one here. When calling out someone else's feelings and they're more senior, do you think there's a danger of it coming across as patronizing? I know it shouldn't make a difference, but I'm imagining this scenario, and in my head, it sounds patronizing. That's a really good one, Charlotte. Does it sound patronizing? Okay, the first thing that jumps into my head there, Charlotte, is a conversation that I had years ago. Vianne, now eldest daughter, always was the eldest daughter, she was, I think she was barely 3. And this is a very sad story, actually. Our dog had died, Hamish, our first deerhound, and I was extremely upset. I was in tears. I was in floods of tears, and I was kneeling down on the floor, I think. And she said something along the lines of, Dad is sad, or something like that. Now, maybe that's not what would happen with your CEO or your director of marketing or your HR director. But it had a profound effect on me because I did not expect her to even have noticed, or to be able to string that thought together, or to even think that that was the right thing to do or say. And when people do get into senior positions, one of the features of being senior is that people stop paying attention to how you're feeling and how you are. And they pay lots of attention to the words and everything else, but it is very isolating. So when somebody comes up to you as a senior person and points something out that you didn't expect, that is very personal, in fact, but is very obvious, then it is likely that it'll feel good. So I think it's a worthwhile endeavour, Charlotte. It's worth taking a chance. And if you're humble about it, which I'm sure you would be, and make it a tentative guess, you sound worried, you look really annoyed, then I'm sure that it'll help them. I hope that works for you, Charlotte. Right, I think that's about it. There was one more question. that we had that came in earlier. I think no. I think it's been covered. Yes, in fact, it was just covered by you, Charlotte. So thanks very much indeed for that one. Are there any other questions that people have which might not be about this topic in particular? I'm just scanning. I think I've scanned the screen, and I haven't left anybody out. Okay, yes, I think that's it. Again, thank you so much for joining and for staying on for the last little bit. Have a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you very soon indeed. Bye.